Welcome to Grosse Pointe Congregational Church for our Sunday worship. We're glad to have you with us. Enjoy our sermon this morning. Following the message, you'll find a link to give to our church, as well as a web link so you can visit our church website for upcoming future church events. Many of our events are done over Zoom. We hope that you'll be able to attend any or all of our scheduled activities. God's blessings be with you. Enjoy our message from Sunday morning. Due to the global pandemic, when children had observed stay-at-home practices to avoid catching or spreading a dangerous virus, experts believe that though sheltering in place protected persons from COVID, there were concerns raised about how children will catch up on their education or obtain appropriate social development skills as they remain at home with their parents. Later in the pandemic, youth were able to take online classes. And finally, this academic year, many have returned to in-face classes. However, for some, they only attend 3 times a week, assuming, of course, the school hasn't closed due to a high infection rate among the student and teacher population. Each day has been different, which has raised additional concerns that the children have been unable to develop correctly as they didn't have a real sense of a stable schedule. There's a valid concern among educators shared on a podcast with a teacher who said the best way to help kids impacted by these unstable schedules is to encourage them to tap into their creative spirits so that they can overcome these obstacles. An example she gave was that she had her 8-year-old and 10-year-old daughters create a game which utilized their imaginations and promoted discussion of their ideas. The goal was to help them navigate unexpected challenges and changes in life's goals and in the decisions that they made for their game. So here's their game. Using blank flashcards, her daughters would write down possible scenarios like you have an extra body part, and now you have to list all the ways that extra body part will be both helpful and a problem. And then, of course, the other players who are playing the game with you would present challenging ideas so that the person has to constantly adapt their initial idea and work through the thought process. Or another one, which I thought was kind of cute, instead of having hair, you now have fur. So what would you be doing differently with your styling options? And what benefits and difficulties would you expect to experience with fur instead of hair? Challenges to your plan could be, what happens when you get gum stuck in your fur? Or you spill Kool-Aid on your furry self? Considering these cute examples, I thought of one. If COVID-19 had happened in 1996, how would we have handled it differently? And how would we have remained in contact? So for better or for worse, as I toyed with my idea, it's important to recall that Windows 95 had just been released. What a great operating system. Blue screen of death. Of course, enabled a lot of persons to use a computer easily. And of course, multiple software programs could be loaded on the computer instead of relying on memorized DOS commands and those wonderful, huge 5-inch floppy disks. However, the internet at that time was dial-up, and video streaming websites were grainy at best, constantly buffering at their worst. YouTube was still 9 years away from becoming what it is today, and live streaming video conversations were reserved for the Sci-Fi Channel. Social media sites were non-existent as MySpace was still 7 years away from being launched, and Facebook was 11 years from allowing non-college students into their service. Instead of relying on Amazon for at-home shopping for groceries and home supplies during the pandemic, we may have used eBay, which was barely a year old as it was launched in September of 1995. Thankfully, some things will remain the same though, as we had email using Hotmail and America Online, with that classic, you've got mail, yes. We certainly would have been communicating differently than as compared to now, maybe even resorting to using smoke signals. Thankfully, at least, we would have had those corded phones to use. At least for us, it was always the dial, the rotary one. I hated when girlfriends always had a 0 in it because you're like, please make it all the way. Thankfully, though, we were able to communicate. And we had the US Postal Service to receive and send letters or invitations with RSVP information. While imagining the drawbacks and opportunities available to us in 1996, and thinking about how we barely use the US Postal Service these days due to email and texting, I recalled that, during COVID, I didn't receive too many personal invitations to a party or an event. And of course, that's not surprising as we all sheltered in place. And it's funny how these things come to mind. And the reason this came to mind is that I received a wedding invitation in the mail this week, which wonderfully means there is a light at the end of this pandemic tunnel. Interestingly, though the invitation utilized the pre-pandemic style of inviting persons to a wedding with actual physical cards and paper, it was also blended with a creative pandemic methods of communication, which relied on using technology, as we had to visit her website to send in our RSVP. This hybrid invitation served as a reminder that the pandemic has changed how we send and receive items from now on. But also, instead of using the mail to return the RSVP and using an online special website, instead have some benefits. The couple can see who has responded to their invitation. The caterer can get an actual head count regarding the requested dish. And lovingly, the response card won't be delayed or lost in the mail. This invitation is a creative way to send a wedding invitation and is a similar type of creativity displayed by the children as they constructively maneuver through this pandemic while retaining their physical and mental health. Their creativity to retain their health is a spiritual gift which helps youth and adults both overcome all obstacles. Based on the scriptures, God delights in providing us with creative ideas and is also often seen utilizing creative ideas as well. Turning then to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah describes God's creative actions by declaring that God had been attempting to send out banquet invitations to the people of Israel for a very long time. But the invitations or the responses must have become lost in the mail, as God seems to have been ignored. Using creative means, God sends new invitations to the people by employing the prophet Isaiah to deliver the invitation to the people. Isaiah invites the people with several phrases. Come to the waters. Come, buy and eat without money and without price. Come to me that the Lord will have mercy on you and our God will abundantly pardon. It is a wonderful invitation, which is similar to the invitations new kings would send to their royal subjects. In Isaiah's day, when a new king was crowned, they would celebrate their ascension to the throne by holding a lavish feast while also releasing the people from all their debts. It was a new beginning for the kingdom and for the people. It's this type of invitation Isaiah proclaims and is later reissued by John the Baptist when he invited everyone to come and receive God's mercy through the act of baptism while he stood on the shores of the Jordan River. John called the people to repent and be baptized that they would enjoy the renewal that God offers. The author, C.S. Lewis, described John the Baptist's cry as an invitation to provide an out for those stuck in an unrepentant hole, where he said people need the help of a friend to get them out. Yet rescuing people from their personal situation requires more than just carrying someone out of their situation, as the person has to also be willing to be carried out and helped out of their situation. Though I am talking about a spiritual and mental position, there's also a physical world example of this displayed on September 1st in 2020, when a woman was hanging from a 16th floor window frame during a high-rise fire in Manhattan. The New York Fire Department was on the scene, but they struggled to enter the 16th floor due to the blaze. The woman, panic-stricken by the heat and smoke, had climbed out her window and clung to the side of the building. Realizing she could fall at any moment, 3 firefighters fought their way to the 17th floor and broke into the apartment above her. Then, using a rope, 2 of the men lowered firefighter Brian Quinn down to her. Bracing his foot on the windowsill, he reached inside her apartment with his arm and hugged the wall inside while he hooked his other arm around her waist and pinned her to the glass. Recognizing that she wasn't going to fall, he then began to speak calmly to her, inviting her to stop panicking. And then he invited her to step back inside her apartment, repeating constantly, "The rescue crews are here and they're extinguishing the fire. I just need you to step back into the building and we'll be rescued." 30 minutes later, the blaze was out and the woman and firefighter Brian Quinn was rescued from inside her apartment. She had finally, at some point in there, allowed Brian to help her by accepting the invitation to step back inside. A simple matter, perhaps, but sometimes when we are panicking or unable to perceive hope beyond our dismal situation, it's tough to accept assistance. Still, during the season of Lent, we receive an invitation from God who offers to redeem us and help us and offers us grace. The question posed to us in the season of Lent then is this: will we joyfully accept the invitation, or will we decline the invitation or claim we are undecided? Reviewing what these options mean, the prophet Isaiah is joyful about sharing the invitation to us. And there are multiple benefits if we accept God's invitation. Free food. This almost seems too good to be true. Yet God declares everything is available without cost. This banquet Isaiah sends invitations to attend is similar to the banquet described by Jesus in the parable of the prodigal son. In the parable, the father won't even allow his son to express his regret in a well-rehearsed speech as the father interrupted and announced that the fatted calf would be prepared for the impressive celebration. It is apparent the feast is impressive and everything is free. All we have to do is return the RSVP. Yet perhaps like the older son in the parable who refused to accept the invitation, there are some who may refuse to accept the invitation to a lavish party because perhaps they might fear who receives God's mercy, or they might feel they don't deserve grace for themselves, or they believe they aren't ready to be open with their faith, or they might have inner doubts that one could make a fresh start, or even doubt that God would truly be so merciful. Or there's also the possibility that persons have other engagements. Regarding the invitation, God doesn't force persons to accept it. As we witness many times in the Gospels, as Jesus invited persons to follow him, and still many declined his invitation, claiming they had other obligations or time constraints. Granted, they may have regretted their decision later, but God gives us the option. Just as God also gives us the option to remain undecided about the invitation to the banquet. Checking not sure on the RSVP is not necessarily a bad thing in all times. It could mean that a person is taking stock of their life and they're trying to decide what's important. Or they're being cautious as they make new commitments or accept invitations to events. The important thing, wonderfully here, is that God honors it just as we are asked to honor God, especially if through patience, the person finally makes the decision after soul searching and they're ready to say to God and to the church, I'm ready. I'm ready to jump in and I'm ready to receive mercy, ready to accept God's abundant pardon and ready to accept the invitation to a fresh start and a new beginning. Wonderfully, God gives us the season of Lent so we can examine what is important in our lives. We can utilize Lent to meet with Christ and recognize what he has designed for our lives. And we have the opportunity to reflect on how we receive the rescuers which God provides for us when we face trouble. This Lenten season also allows us to gain trust in those who worship with us. Perhaps persons whom God has sent to journey with us in this spiritual journey as we make the decision to accept the invitation to a banquet. Joyfully, whether we're undecided or initially refusing the invitation, God still creates space for us at the banquet table. And God wonderfully is the type of host who never forgets where persons will sit when we forget to change the RSVP card. Or perhaps the mail system misplaces our response. God knows who we are and extends the invitation to us so we can join the feast, which features persons from every tribe, nation, language, and people. Joyfully, the feast is ready. God is at hand, and there is no cost. So come, rejoice, and enjoy. Delight in God's creativity and renewal for our souls. I invite you to join with me as we pray. Holy God, we thank you for this awesome feast. We're grateful it is supplied for free, and freely we come. We have count well the cost as we journey through the season of Lent, and we happily receive your invitation as we examine ourselves spiritually and mentally. God, we're ready to be united with you as we receive your feast. And God, we're thankful for your mercy, and we're thankful for the grace that we have received through your Son. God, we're thankful for the rescuers whom you've sent. And God, we're thankful that all the honor and glory is yours as we lift our praise to you, saying thank you as you love us. Amen.